Thanks for coming along. I hope my little story enlightens a few people and learn a few lessons, because I certainly learned a few lessons over the last, or that 15-year journey I've had with Zork. So I'm just going to try and tie this off somewhere, so I don't trip over it. I thought I'd start with just a bit of a background of my personal journey and where Zork fits in the picture. I won't go all the way back, you don't need to hear that, but I arrived in Adelaide in 1980 and studied at Underdale, SACAE it was then, now not Flinders, sorry, UniSA, and did the industrial design course down there. It was a pretty formative time for me. It's a very exciting time to learn about a new profession of industrial design. And when I came out of the course, I started my own little company. I don't even have the right logo there because it was before digital. So I haven't even got an old business card I could photograph and put up there. Called Design Partner. I started in partnership with a colleague student and one of the professors out at the uni. And they were in the days when nobody knew what industrial design was. And we were knocking on the doors of all the manufacturers around town. They're going, oh, my grandfather's been designing our brushes at Sabco for 50 years. What do we need you here for? And dare I say it, back then I actually got called, by one client, what do I need poofter designers like you as well, Totally not PC. Nowadays, I get it, but it just showed that the perception of creative people back in those days was really different to what it is now. And it's so nice to see that nobody develops a product now without a designer. And businesses are starting to value the creative arts and skills and bring them into business. And I've definitely seen that change over the last 30 years, and it's a delight to see that happen in all sorts of professions. My daughter's just going into fashion design, so I see it happening in her world. My son's a poet, and I see it happening in his literary world as well. So it's good to see that finally business is breaking or opening the doors to the creative people in this world. I merged my company with a bunch of engineers to form ADD, Applied Design Development. And I put a little example of this is a product that we designed together. It actually brought the partnership together, and it follows my journey through a couple of decades actually. This is a product called Spaceball. It was the first 3D mouse controller that you could push, pull and twist and control an object in three-dimensional space. And for the first 3D computers were starting to come in. When this product came to our engineers, it came as a wire frame with a ball in the middle and wires attached out to the edge, and you had to put your hand inside. And he said, look, if you push and pull on the ball in the middle, the strain gauges and all the wires control the software and the object on the computer. Isn't that cool? They took that and turned it inside out, or outside in, and put it all inside the ball and using optics they basically invented an optical strain gauge. They brought it to me and said, oh, can you make a prototype of this? I don't want any design, I just want to use your workshop, make a prototype. And I quoted up the job, tried to sell them on industrial design. They wouldn't have a bar of it, didn't want to spend any money on that creative stuff. What do we need that for? And then the morning before I was taking the proposal in to see if they would accept their quote to build it, I came in early because I couldn't sleep the night before, and I cut a foam model. And we used to work before 3D printing, we used to work in styrene foam a lot. So I cut a foam model of what they were asking for, and I cut a foam model of something I'd sketched up the night before. So I put the proposal on the table and said, is that okay? And he said, yep, great, terrific. I said, look, I've made a model of what you think you're looking for, so something in 3D. He said, oh, fantastic, that's really good. And I said, I also made this one. And he goes, oh. And he just pushed that off to the side, threw it in the bin, accepted my proposal and moved forward. And from then on, I've always realised that it's much easier to show people what you can do than it is to sell them a promise, because they're just you're trying to sell them a bit of blue sky they can't see and touch. As soon as you can give them something to touch, then they really get it, they understand, and they can buy in. And not only did I get the job to develop this, I brought in 3 new business partners. We built ADD over 15 years to a consultancy here in Adelaide of 25, which is big. We were the first company in Australia, or first consultancy to get 3D computing into the company. We've been through printing rapid prototypes for 30 odd years, and people think it's new. I find that funny too. We were the first consultancy to really embrace what we called concurrent engineering back then, where typically the engineers would do their bit and they'd hand it over the wall to the designers in the next consultancy, and they'd pretty it up, dip it in a bucket of pretty pills, as we say, or take it down to the chamfer department or something. We were the first company to really integrate the design and the engineering process together. And the benefits of that are you get sort of design inspiration involved in the technical element or a technical process, and the other way around. And they all work together in synergy with each other. Layering manufacturing over the top of that is the next thing that we didn't do then, but we're doing now. So we had a lot of firsts. We had an integrated firm where we had physicists, mechanical engineers, electronics engineers, software engineers, tool designers, CAD operators, industrial designers, workshop, graphic designers. We had a fully integrated service. And then there was the recession we had to have here, and the whole thing just crashed. We couldn't sustain it. And that's what I've found in Adelaide is the hard thing is to sustain, a sizable company like this, what I call a tier 1 firm in South Australia. It's really difficult. Another story, but I'm working on that on the side. My story at ADD sort of took me to the next step where I joined a company. Well, I was asked to come and run the San Francisco office of a company called Continuum based in Boston. They had a San Francisco office. They actually designed this version of the product. I couldn't find an old photo of the one we designed, but they actually designed this. So they took our design and redesigned it because the company was successful enough to move to America and renamed themselves Spatial Systems. Because of that connection there, I met Gianfranco Zaccai, who was the founder of Design Continuum, and we built a relationship over about 10 years. And when he needed a change in San Francisco, he rang me up and said, John, you're the guy, I want to come over. So I ran their design office in San Francisco for 3 years, right at the very peak and the bust of the .com era over there. So it was just a crazy time where employers were giving new employees signing bonuses of $5,000 and $10,000 just for signing on, because getting help, good help, was really, really difficult. And I remember we gave a guy, we signed him on, he was in, he was signed, we didn't have to do anything. After he'd signed, we gave him a check for $5,000 to say thanks for signing, to make him feel good to coming on. People were buying cars and apartments for stock options. And when those stock options crashed like this, they were going broke. And it was an incredible ride working in San Francisco. We had a little office in South Park, south of Market Street, and there were the sort of top 5 or 6 design firms in America all around the same park area. So a client could come park their car once, have 5 meetings during the day, go to the top 5 design firms in California and quote the same job and walk out. That's how competitive it was. We got our share of the work. We missed our share of the work. It was just one of those things, and most of us knew the other designers around town anyway. So this is a community that you live in. You'll get to know each other, and designers move around. So this is a product, a webcam product for Logitech. I met the marketing manager of the web division for Logitech on the ferry. we happened to live on the same side of the bay, and I'd ride my bike into the ferry, I'd jump on the ferry, and driving a car across the bridge wasn't my idea. Got chatting to him. Turns out he knew a few people that we knew over in Marin County, and which kind of joins dots for people and builds relationships, so that was really good. So he gave me the opportunity to solve a problem they've been trying to solve for 2 years. They bought this little business, which is the spherical webcam. I don't know if some of you might be old enough to remember that. The first webcam, you do, you're nodding. Well, I don't know. And they challenged their technical department to design a clip, because laptops were coming in more and more instead of desktops. So they challenged their technical department to design a clip that would attach this ball on top of the screen of a laptop, any design laptop, now and in the future. And their engineers had been designing springs and clips and clamps and all sorts of mechanisms to do it. He said, we can't do it, you do it. You do it, you got the job. So I took the problem back to our team. We had some mechanical engineers and 3 or 4 industrial designers at that stage. We sat in a room, we had about 3 hours worth of brainstorming over lunch, a long lunch. And we essentially all threw our hands in the air and walked out. So I go, no, we can't do it either. And this is actually one of my favourite moments in my career so far, is young Sammy Sang walked out the door, sort of head down, says, you know the problem, John? He says, gravity is our enemy. And I went, Sammy, what's that? And I grabbed him by the back of the shirt and I pulled him back in and said, say that again. He said, gravity is our enemy. And I said, so how do we make gravity our friend? Very simply, we were trying to hang the ball in front of the screen. Hang the ball on the back of the screen, all of a sudden, all you need is an edge and a surface. And every laptop is going to have an edge and a surface. So we designed this little guy here. It's very simple little bracket that's just like a hook. And now, well then, I think they've moved on because cameras are inside the laptops now, but this format, this architecture for holding a webcam onto a laptop became ubiquitous across the industry. But it's just that little magical moment when someone thinks, oh, I know this is too hard. And I just go, oh, you know, this thing's your enemy. You know, if you can turn your enemy, what's generally a negative that everybody fights with, you can make that a positive, all of a sudden, opportunity opens up. And that's just one of the great little stories I have of Design Continuum. When the dot-com crashed, all of a sudden the road down to Palo Alto was empty, the ferry was empty. Used to take us about 2 hours to drive from San Francisco to Palo Alto. In the space of about 2 months, we could now drive down there in about 20 minutes. That's the physical impact it had on San Francisco. I used to have to get to the ferry terminal a ferry before the one I wanted to catch and wait 20 minutes. Within a couple of months, I could just turn up with my bike and walk on 2 minutes before it pulled out. This was palpable, the feeling in the city. It just went quiet. Amazing for San Francisco to go quiet. Anyway, we were sent home. My 3 years contract was up anyway. We had 2 little kids, so we brought the kids home. We wanted them to be educated in Australia, not in America. So the timing wasn't terrible. We probably would have stayed another couple of years at the most, but we brought them home. And I had decided to not go back into consulting. I wanted to use my experience to try and create a product company of my own. And I'd been putting feelers out and fishing around for some ideas, and I met a guy called Conor McKenna, who was working in the wine glass industry at the time. And he put the problem to me. He's saying, well, screw caps are just starting to come in, but nobody really wants them. This is back in 2001. Everybody likes the cork, but the cork's got a problem because it taints the wine. Isn't there something in the middle? And from that, we invented Zork. I'll get into that in a bit more detail in a while. I'm just going to keep an eye on the time. At the end of the Zork journey, which is still going, by the way, we sold in 2011 to Shirley Packaging, They make the bag-in-box. They're quite a big company in South Australia. They do a lot of work here, but they're under the radar because they're business to business. Most of their business is essentially like a wine bag, but in a pallet size or 10-litre size bags. So every time you go to a pub, you ask for a Bundy and Coke, and they pour Coke out of the gun. It's sucking Coke out of a trolley bag behind the bar. I think 3/4 of the American tomato harvest is pulped for ketchup, and it's put into a trolley bag, the size of a pallet. So they've got a lot of technology, and part of their industry is the wine industry, and it's the strongest here in Australia. While I was at, so they bought Zork because their closure technology was very similar to what we did for Zork, and there's another story in there. And while I was there, they gave me the challenge of redesigning the wine cask, where they wanted to be able to, essentially the customer to be able to open the cask and the tap was already in place. They'd spent a lot of time with their engineers, in-house engineers and designers, outside consultants. And they designed these clever little mechanisms to pull in and out, all this sort of stuff. So I started some concepting for them, and they said, oh, by the way, you have no tooling budget, no development budget, and you can't increase the cost of the product. So I redesigned the cardboard box. And I made the box with a little cavity in it so you could drop the bag in, take the front off the box, and the tap was already in place. They could not believe it because they said, we don't sell cardboard boxes, how can we make money out of this? And they were challenged by that. And I said, you've got a design here that's more convenient for your consumer. They will buy more cardboard, more bag-in-box, more cask wine, and you will sell more bags. And so finally they twigged that this was something they should pick up and promote. I'm not sure if anybody's picked it up. I know in America they've been talking to some other people. And then finally what I'm currently doing at the moment is Aptus product realisation, where I'm doing turnkey design and manufacturing for my clients. So taking the manufacturing experience and my design experience and pulling them together so that I can offer a full turnkey service for clients. My most recent client that you might know is just down the other end of this, Humani Hut. I did a 3-year contract with them, taking their early prototypes and into a pilot production run, setting up a plant in China and manufacturing our first order in China for them. So to get on to Zork, there's about a 15-year history with Zork. In 2001, Connor and I took our business plan, to a business planning competition in Brisbane called Moot Corp. Essentially 13 MBA schools from across Australia all come together, and they have what you might have heard as a pitch fest, where you pitch your ideas to a panel and you win. Sometimes you win a prize, sometimes you win money, sometimes it's in-kind services. We won everything except second. We won Entrepreneur of the Year, Best Business Plan, Best Presentation, overall winner. And then the next one was second, and we decided we better let somebody else have that one. From that, we got our first little bit of investment. Tiny little bit of investment, a lot of it was in-kind services. And we spent the next 3 years developing what we call the STL product for still wine. It's a very boring name, but it's one of those names. Be careful when you name your products, because if you let engineers name them like this, they tend to get stuck. They grow into the company vocabulary and they get stuck, and they're really hard to change afterwards. So if you're developing a product, name it straight up. It's like having a baby, give it a name. Otherwise someone will just call it George and you'll hate the name George. I remember the founder of that business apologised publicly for calling his product the PCMCIA card because nobody could say it. He got stuck in the same trap. And please jump in with questions because I want this to be a conversation. If you've got any questions, stick your hand up. And there's a bit more detail to come through. And what I've done is I've picked out about 10 of the key learnings I've had out of the Zork process. This was an interesting time where we realised here that STL wasn't going to really make it in the market because we were competing with cork and we were competing with screw cap. And we realised because we'd been out in the market talking to customers, talking to producers, that something else they were missing was something for sparkling wine. There's nothing for sparkling wine. Cork is unsafe, it's unpredictable. They call them flyers or pliers. They either fly out by themselves or you need pliers to pull them out. So you should do one for sparkling. And we tried to convince our investors to do that and said, no, you can't do that because we've invested in this. We want you to make money out of that first, then you can go and do that. And we said, no, it's just not going to work because we're not going to make money out of that. We need to do this now. Spend your money here. Said, no, and there was this, that was the first fight, first disagreement. We went away and did it anyway. We just didn't tell them in the background. So we were working on this in the background, spending money on tooling and prototyping. Just don't be specific about it. And then when we got to the point where they finally realised it wasn't working, we said, oh, well, how about this prototype? And they go, oh, wow, you're on the ball, that's great. You know? So we developed SPK. It's about 3-year development time to develop a closure, which is a long development time for something this small. I've got some samples here of both the STL and the SPK version if people want to pass them around. They look really simple. They're incredibly complex. Probably the most complex and difficult product I've ever designed is right there. But we were successful in selling some. So we had more success in America with STL. We had a company, Don Sebastiani and Sons, who took on Zork and really embraced it. And I think at one point they had 9 different brands and they were taking 3 or 4 million Zorks a year, just that one company. Our foundation customer is Red Knot Shingleback Wines, McLaren Vale. They picked it, they came to the launch, they picked it up and they used STL in their wines for 10 years. I think they finished up here. And I remember doing the first production run and Kim Davey, we had the press there, we had a big pallet of Red Knot wines, all this sort of stuff, and Kim Davies leaning over the pallet, shaking hands like this, photos for the camera. And Kim's gritting through his teeth and saying, you stuff this up, Brooksy, and you're dead. So actually when it came to the time and they were getting pressure to move to screw cap, about 5 or 6 years down the track, because everybody else was moving to screw cap and they weren't, I knocked on Kim's door and said, Kim, have we fucked it up? He goes, no. So give us a chance, keep going. And he did. To his credit, he did. He kept us going. So we remained faithful to him and he remained faithful to us, and it was a really good partnership. Trust isn't something I'll get to in a minute. We had the GFC. We needed more money. We couldn't raise more money. It really pushed us to a point where we had to sell. And we were lucky to have had Shirley on side since day one. I had breakfast with the owner of Shirley, with Bill Shirley, the owner of Shirley Packaging, back in 2001. And I said, Bill, I want you to invest and eventually buy this business. And he said, no, we don't invest and I'm not interested in buying it, but I will be your friend. And he stood true to that and helped us anytime we wanted with advice on materials, processing, manufacturing, moulding, all the way through to the point where I set out, it's a little lesson I learned from California, because a lot of people in California said they're going to have a startup business and their only exit strategy is to sell to Microsoft. That's it. It's an all or nothing strategy. And I kind of took that approach when I came to Zork and said, I'm going to build this company to sell to Shirley at the end of the day. I found out the materials they used. I specified their materials. I found out the suppliers they used. I specified them. I hired one of their technical managers to write the documentation and quality control plans so that when they came to buy Zork here, they opened everything and they didn't have one technical question. They just said, yep, that's how we do it. Put the book down and argued about price. So that strategy worked for me in this case. I worked for Shirley for about 3 years, and in that time we developed what we call SPK Optimum, which is a lightweight version of the sparkling closure. It only has 2 pieces instead of 4 pieces. And it's about 30% cheaper, so it's for the really what we call value wines, value sparkling wines. Zork was never designed for the high-end wines. It was always designed for the commercial wines because that's where the value, that's where the numbers are, the volumes are, and but it's also where the commodity pricing is. So pricing was always a challenge for us. And then Shirley was bought out by IPN, I think in 2014, and that's when I left Shirley because the new owner decided we didn't need he didn't like Zork anyway, so he's focused on bigger things. I think they wiped about 300 people off the books in the space of a few months. Anyway, getting into more specifics about Zork is the big idea was to take something that seals like a screw cap but pops like a cork. And that was our slogan for a while until we got a little bit more bold and said, no, Zork, not cork. You know. That was our big idea. We did a lot of trying and failing and learning along the way, and there's a lot of cliches in here you will see, but a lot of them, cliches are there because they're generally true. And we learned fast, and our biggest lesson was that, with STL, to listen to the market. You take what you think is a good idea, you take it out to the market and you test it. You test it with the market and you really listen to the market. There's a lot of people tell you what they think you want to hear, but you've got to watch their behaviours. It really tells you what they think. And everybody's saying, yeah, Zork's a great idea, it's terrific, it's fantastic, I love it, I love it, love it. No, I'm not going to buy it. That is actually them telling you about the market. And then when they ask you questions and say, you know, how about the sparkling industry? Can you do one for that? You really need to listen to that. And it's hard to let go of your big idea. We pushed STL really quite hard. And this is a little evolutionary sort of snapshot of the idea started with when Connor one night put a syringe into the top of a bottle after giving his little kid some Panadol one night. And it just happened to drop into the top of a Jacobs Creek wine bottle. And he goes, maybe there's an idea there for a closure. And this is what's this? This is a nylon sintered part where we had someone design a piece that snaps over a bottle, but it still has the plunger in it, like a syringe does. Which is why the little black bit in the middle is called a plunger. Not many people know that one. We machined another prototype that combined the two together so you could snap it over and still have the plunger in the middle. We built some rapid prototypes. That's a rapid prototype. That's our first injection moulded cap. Notice the tab on it. That one had no tab. That one had a very short tab. That one had what we call the vertical tab. This one had a 2.5 turn tab. We were thinking the tab design for ergonomics and ease of picking up and using. What we ended up doing was having to go to this because of bottling. And when you're running a bottling line with bottles running down at 25,000, 30,000 bottles an hour, you can't afford to drop a closure for a very competitive price. You had to design something that you could put on using existing bottling line equipment. Because if you have to turn around and ask a producer, say, here's our new cap, invest in this, take a risk with your Jacobs Creek brand. Oh, by the way, you have to spend $150,000 on a new piece of equipment. They just go, no. So what we had to do is find a way to change existing screw cappers and corkers so that they could apply a Zork on it.
With the designs on the tab, especially the grooves on the pull tab, how did you figure out how thin you'd have to make it in order for them to pull off fairly easily, but then to make it and mold it in a very economical way?
That's a really good question. You've almost hit the nail on the head. It's not just the manufacturing, but it's a very fine balance between weak enough to tear but strong enough to hold on. When you press that on, you think, I can't talk without a pen in my hand, so you've got a bottle. You've got a bottle this shape, and I've got a cap that's this diameter. And I've got to make this cap stretch over the top of that before it can sit in here. So it puts a lot of strain on that tear band. And you're consciously making a weak point. It's got to be strong enough so it doesn't blow apart when you push it on the bottle, but weak enough so you can still peel it with your hand. The answer there is I took it to an FEA expert who did some analysis on it. He said, you can't do it. He says, give up. He says, it'll never happen. And I said, no, my gut says I reckon I can. And so we took a risk and we built a tool. The only way to do it is to build a tool and prototype it. And the number of times we remade the slides to adjust the thickness of the bottom of that V groove in there, I've lost count, but that was one of the hardest things certainly with this version of the closure, with STL. We even launched into some social media campaigns and marketing, all sorts of things. So I brought a little fun video along here. Can you hear that, sort of? Thought you'd get a kick out of this. It didn't go down well in America. They're a lot more prudish over there than we are here. What's going to happen? Wait for it. Anyway.
Interesting, yeah, because it was much more focused on the problem rather than the solution.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. For a consumer, retaining the pop was really important because that's the one thing screw cap didn't do, is pop. It went, as someone said to me once, more like wringing the neck of a rabbit than it is opening a bottle of wine. But it was then that we really realised that we had to be different instead of compete. STL was competing with screw cap and with cork. We had to do something different. We had to jump into a whole new world, pardon the cliche, and be something different. Oh, yes, sorry. So one day I was asked the question, hey Brooksy, how does a teaspoon keep the bubbles in your bubbly? Guess what my answer was? Any prizes? Doesn't. It's a wives' tale. No. Otherwise, why would you need a cork? They'd just send it out without a cap on it or put tin foil on it. No. The whole oxygen gas barrier technology is way more complicated. So we took a cork and a recloser and put them together to make SPK. This is where persistence kicks in. And I've got a good friend who's described me as the frog in the swamp several times because I just won't let go of a problem once I need looking for an answer. And so we had to go basically back to the drawing board and do all of this again. This is 4 years into our investment money. And a bit more detail, this is essentially an STL with a cap over the top that locks in what we call the collet fingers on the top here. That's a rapid prototype. We realised that wouldn't work because if someone pulls the cap off before they peel the tab off, the whole thing can self-extract and you can hurt somebody. So then this is where we took the cap and the collet in separate pieces and thought, okay, let's design the interference between here and here so that it pushes into the bottle first and then the cap pushes over the top of it and it self-assembles during the bottling process. Kind of worked. Then we sort of took the next step and we essentially had the collet and the cap. This one's cut in half, a little difficult to see, but they were basically combined together as one, but no hole in the top. So it relied completely on the interferences between the inside and the outside part working 100% every time. And what tripped us up is when it worked, we opened it all up, but then when somebody pushed it with their finger and snapped the two inside without it going on a bottle, you would never get it out and you would never get it back on a bottle again. So the whole resealing thing was out the window. That's why there's a hole in the top. So that's where we got to the collet. You'll also notice, actually I got one of these out of order, sorry. You'll notice this one has little vertical ribs here that key this to this so that they line up with each other. This one had a little web to join the collet fingers together, and the idea is that would break as it goes over for the first time to make it easier to apply. And what we had here, this is where we've got the hole in the top here, the first button at the top, and we've still got these little ribs here. So to release it, you pull the outer cap, and the rest of it came with it, and you could click, click, push it back on. And we made some of these. We produced the first batch was like this, but we realised that everybody, even though you can pull it off, people were still twisting it. And if they were twisting it and not pulling it, then it was just really not intuitive, not easy for it to come off. So even though we tried to make the design really intuitive, so you just go pop, pop, click, click, and it worked really well, they were used to doing this. Even to a cork, to work a cork out of a bottle, you twist it to pull it out. So we had to go back to the drawing board, which actually gave us, there's slightly longer vertical ribs. It actually gave us a whole new patent driven around this cam system where you could push the cap down and pull it out, as well as twist the cap and it would ride up these cams here and twist itself off. So we had basically had a mechanism that you could push, pull or twist and give you both of those actions, and that opened up a whole new patent opportunity for us. You can twist it back on, but you don't have to, you can just push it back on. And then we've ended up with, that's where we end up with everything inside, a slightly smaller buttonhole on top, the cam mechanism, and there's a couple of, some of those samples might have had them, but there's a couple of clear samples here that you can see the cam system on the inside. That's a really complicated little moulding because the core, the piece of steel that goes in here to make these shapes, is bigger in diameter than the hole that it has to come out of. So we had to develop these, what they call collapsing cores, where you've got a core that's like a mushroom like this, and it has to, a piece of steel, you pull the centre core out of it and it collapses in like this so it can pull out of the part and then go back in to make the next cap. So every 10 seconds we shoot 8 of those. Then came the whole testing process. To test a wine closure, you can do some accelerated testing 2 years down the track. So this is only 16 months. We have to go for 24 months before anybody serious will take you seriously on the performance of your wine. So it's a really slow testing cycle before you can feed that back into your design. Now, we can do little iterations in between, but until you've done this, it's really hard to get any sort of traction with any major supplier. You get people like Red Knot who they'll just go for it and take a punt. If you notice those samples coming around, they've got a piece of foil on the inside. That foil acts as an oxygen barrier. Oh, now I've done it. So you got the top of a bottle here. You got what we call like a soft rubber seal. We called it the plunger that goes down inside. And the reason it goes down inside the bottle is so that it extracts enough air when you pull it out to make a pop. The only reason it's there is to make a pop. It actually does all of the sealing work here. This volume in here is what makes the pop. I never thought I'd be an industrial designer who's designing a pop. Also, that peel tab that comes off is a piece of rubbish. And we spent ages designing a piece of rubbish to look as nice as we could, so that it spiraled together and collapsed and was minimal, and actually trying to turn it into something. We had Don Sebastiani and Sons turned it into like a wristband and made something positive out of it. It was really creative. It was great. So we have the seal, the plunger that goes here. There's a foil seal comes across here before this is welded inside the cap. That's the main cap itself. So this foil seal is actually a barrier to oxygen. Oxygen and gases pass through plastic. So plastic Coke bottles, for example, have a short shelf life. A couple of months or your Coke starts to go flat. That's why they use glass for wine and for gaseous drinks, because the permeability of gases through the package is really critical to what the drink tastes like.
And what do you think about putting your leftover food in the fridge in plastic?
Yeah, exactly. So the whole testing cycle was a real challenge to us to get that, to try and get learnings from that throughout the process. Every month we were getting a report, and we'd do something a bit more with that. We'd adjust some things, but you really don't know until you're 24 months in. This is Flavour and Aroma testing, so testing panels. All this was done at the Australian Wine Research Institute. To do a 24-month test is probably over $100,000. Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot of investment. We raised $10 million over 10 years to develop Zork. No. I'm not sure I want to. They're really hard. I certainly wouldn't do it with my money. Because then there's the next bit is the assembly machine. So we had to design a machine that assembled this thing at 44 parts a minute. And that's $1 million as well. And this is a little video of it just to show you how complex it'll be. This is the caps going in, getting pushed into a dial, which has a nest in it. Where are we? There's the dial coming along. This is probably a bit hard to see, but there's a foil. Oh no, I think we missed a stage. There's a foil gets punched in, and then the plunger gets pushed in on top of it. Oh, this is the collet going in, sorry. So cap goes in, collet goes in. This is a punch. There's a foil running through here. That's getting punched into the collet. And then there's a little rubber seal. Where is it? Coming along here. That's getting pushed into the top of the collet. Then they're getting induction welded together. And then they're getting checked. So the rule with these automated machines is you do an action, you check the action. You do an action, you check the action. So I put a cap in. Is the cap there? Yes, go. If it's not there, you remember the station and you eject it when it comes out the other side. Put a collet in, is the collet there? Put a foil in, is the foil there? Put a seal in, is the seal there? And so there's a lot of mechanisms.
Did you guys design that as well?
Yeah, I was about to say, do you design the machine?
No,
Or
no,
design
no.
it with the machine in mind?
I design it with the process in mind, but I manage the process. There's engineers who specialise in building these sorts of assembly machines, there's assemblers, and I manage that process and I work closely with them to do that. So I'm not a mechanical engineer. But you do have to design the product in mind for assembly right from day one. So the collet, the ramp on the collet, when that goes in, that has to align itself automatically, because the collet can be in any orientation, the cap can be in any orientation, and when you press them together, they've got to go boom and automatically align themselves together. So you've got to have this sort of top-down system. We made the first 800,000 by hand. I got my son a job on holidays, so we had a little machine that was basically, the person was the conveyor belt. They'd pick up the parts, put them in the machine, go like this, pass them on. Go like this, pass them on. And we had 4 people all doing these processes and welding them. We made the first 800,000 parts like that because we had to, who said that? We had to keep the doors open. We had to sell these things. They were costing us 50 cents a piece. We were selling them for 20 cents. We were sticking 30 cents to the top of every one of them. But if you don't do that, you don't invest, you can't get into the market. You delay your opportunity to get into the market. You delay your opportunity to learn from the market. You delay your opportunity to just put your brand out there so that when you are ready to go, you've got a bit of traction to work from. This is the bottling machine, because the same thing applies to the bottling machine. So this whole machine is an existing bottling machine, screw capping machine actually, and we adjusted it so that the chute comes down, picks off a cap, puts it on, and a capping head here comes down, presses it on. It's a lot more complicated than that, but this is the fastest line we had running at a company called Heraes in Germany. I'll play that again. Might seem really boring to you, but this is just music to my ears, this sort of stuff. And the best day on a bottling line is a boring day on a bottling line. When nothing happens, you just stand there and go, if you could fall asleep. So you notice there's some caps here that have fallen off. That's at startup, but once this is running, and it's just running like that, it's just music to my ears to see that happen. That's a big deal. That's a fast bottling line for sparkling wine. Probably the fastest I've ever seen. And then we made another little promo video, not as risque as the last one, but it shows how I guess we matured a little bit as a company.
Yeah, that was your
So some of the other, I guess the things that's really stick in my mind is to start with the end in mind. I told the story of how I hired the technical manager out of Shirley because I had 2 or 3 people interviewing for the job, and I picked him because of his past experience, because that was the target of who I wanted to sell into. So he helped me put all of this documentation together around the closure and select right materials and processes that were really familiar to them. So I set up the technical side. I didn't have any control over the management side of the business. I was looking after the technical side. So I had control over all of that. And I set this up with Shirley as target number 1 to sell this to. And that's what ended up happening. So if you can sort of set your exit strategy, set your goals in mind, but if you don't have them in mind, you don't really know where you're going and you can't position yourself for it. Trust. This is a big one for me, but building trust inside and outside your company is important. Here's the biggest cliche in life, the 3 things in life: good, fast and cheap. Pick 2. And generally, if you want it cheap and fast, how bad do you want it? You want it bad, you get it bad. The cheaper you want it, the worse you get it. Well, the faster you want it, the worse you get it. And to get something in the middle here where there's good, fast and cheap, guess what? In your dreams. Not happening. I think there is a way to get the best of all 3, and that's with trust. If you have partners, clients, suppliers, staff working with you that you trust, you know that they are in it for the right reasons to do the right thing, and you're working together, you've got to give trust to get trust. If you can build trust between these 3 elements of your business, then you don't have to look over your shoulder and say, are they making a good product? You don't have to look over your shoulder and say, are they doing it as fast as they possibly can, or are they going off and doing someone else's work for me? You don't have to look over your shoulder and say, is there enough money for me to pay for the tooling so I can do my job the best way I can? If there's real trust and teamwork working between the key people in the business, then you can get the best of those 3. But without that, you're always looking over your shoulder. That's when red tape and administration comes in, checks and balances come in, just to make sure everybody's doing their job and they're delivering on time, and got the quality right, and everything like this. My experience, and I've been in all 3 seats. My experience is that management is the one that pushes the pressure on the quality and the speed, but management is the one that delivers least, because management tends to think they have to be closed about strategies, about money, about tactics. I think if management these days, and I think it's changing, if management was prepared to be a bit more open, to say, this is my game, this is what I'm playing with, and you tell me what your problems are, and you tell me what your problems are, then we can somehow find a way for them all to work. But if management goes like this and say, just leave the money to me, it'll be fine, and then they ask these guys to run around and make a really good product, quality product really quickly, and then they turn around, but they can't pay their suppliers because management hasn't got the investment in at the right time, then you break down the supply chain, you break down that trust between your suppliers. And that eventually comes back to bite you. I had an incident just last week with a client who, it's a startup, they're struggling to pay, I get it. But they told me for 3 weeks the money was coming in the bank. They'd left their account and it was coming, the check was in the mail. Until I really asked the right person, they said, actually, no, it hasn't left the bank, and I'll sort it out and we'll pay you tomorrow. And they did. But for 3 weeks, it eroded that trust that I had with them that it was happening. And we'd just moved heaven and hell to deliver the pilot production run for their product for them. The terms initially were 50% up front, 50% on shipping. That means you put the money in my bank before I put it on the truck. We shipped it anyway. It came here. It had been here for 3 weeks. We still hadn't been paid. Guess what happens next time we do this? My manufacturer says, I ain't doing that again. You put the money in the bank first. So he's eroded trust, and he's broken down our ability to respond to their needs as management. So I think from a management point of view, it's more valuable to be open and transparent and share that knowledge, that information with everybody, so everybody can work around it. If they'd been open and said, oh, we're having a bit of a difficult time, it's going to be 3 weeks, I'll get the money, okay, fine. We can work around that. Or here's a payment plan, I'll pay you in 3 chunks instead of 1. We can work with that. But instead they eroded that trust with our suppliers, and now it's harder for us to do our job. Patience, and by this I mean patient capital. You need patient money, you need investors who know what they're doing. Don't just come in waiting to turn a fast buck, because this is what everybody expects. They expect the hockey stick to happen. Yep, we're going to be negative for a little while, and then we're going to break even, and then we go, boom, we're going to make money. This is what really happens. Not all the time. Some people exceed their expectations, of course, but you've got to have people that are prepared for this journey. Everybody wants this journey or more, but you've got to have people who are prepared for this journey, or just don't, or be careful about managing their expectations and taking them on as an investor. Nearly there. Collaboration is a big one for me. I've already talked about the good, fast and cheap and trust. But working with your manufacturers, your customers, your distributors, and you can't do this on your own. You need to build a network of reliable, I guess, friends of Zork we used to call them. We used to call them a FOS, you know. If you're a friend of Zork, you know, because they're promoting their wines, but they would talk to us about it and we would co-promote. Red Knot sort of lived the journey with us, and they were really honourable in the way they worked with us, even when times got a bit tough. And they were getting pressure from the market to move. They basically put their foot down and said, no, we're not moving. We're going to stay different. Thanks. We've got our other brands if you want screw cap, but Red Knot is Zork. You know, they come together. And Vinpac, I have to say, sometimes an interesting company to work with, but they're the biggest player in the wine market here, particularly in South Australia. And they took us to the next step. We signed Vinpac on as our distributor just before Shirley bought us. And they brought in Yellowtail, which is Australia's largest producer, not of sparkling wine, but wine producer. I think they make about 5 or 6 million bottles of sparkling wine, and every one of them has a Zork on top of it. Now, it's a bit hard to see because they've got the foil on, but it's a bit sad that I can recognise from the other side of the room, but I recognise that profile as a Zork underneath it. So they take about 5 or 6 million Zorks a year, still, 10 years after. Sorry, that one was about, you do need a little bit of luck along the way, you know, but if you're not out there doing it and turning over the stones and shaking the trees, you're not making your own luck. You can't, you know, some people call it timing. You've got to get the timing right. I think you just got to be in the right place at the right time, and that means getting into as many places as often as you can. And then finally, you know, when there is success, share the success back, because you know, failure is an orphan, but success has many fathers. You know, everybody wants to be part of that, and you haven't got to success. Nobody makes success on their own. Everybody gets there by working with others, by listening to what they say, by them contributing and just investing in you as a person and your passion for your project and what you're doing. So be open to sharing that back. It doesn't mean write everybody a check and send it out. It means give credit where credit's due. It means feed the network, and the network will feed you. It means giving respect to people and honour their contribution to what you're doing. So if someone provides you an idea that you pick up and you carry on and you build into it, give credit to that idea back there. And I think that sort of stuff comes back to you in spades, you know, with an attitude like that. And then the last slide is, you know, just I think we're over, I know we're well over 100 millions or SPKs now, and still being made at Elizabeth West by Shirley Packaging. So, that's it. Thanks.